I actually had to read a review I wrote about Sniper Ghost Warrior 2 6 years ago to even remember if I liked that game and what parts of it I didn't like. I distinctly remember not liking the very first game in this series very much because it suffered from the Far Cry 1 problem of enemies knowing your exact location the second they were alerted, but apparently I enjoyed my time with the second installment enough to even give it a mild recommendation, at least if bought at a discount. I had this third game on my wishlist for a while now and bought it for $5 during the last Christmas sale because I've always had a fondness of sniping gameplay and sometimes my urges get the better of me. Now that I've played Sniper Ghost Warrior 3, I come away from it with very muted feelings. The sniping gameplay is solid enough. If you're looking for a real challenge, you can turn off all the HUD markers and really delve deep into sniping your enemies with bullets that require you to take gravity and wind into consideration. On that front, little has changed from what I remember from the previous games. It's a solid core of gameplay that should suffice to carry an entire game. However, this game has a propensity of trying its hardest not to simply be a good sniping game. I remember criticizing the aggressive linearity of the previous game, but going the opposite route and giving players an open world to explore kind of overshoots the intended target, pardon the pun. The feeling I get when I look at this game is that the developers saw how lucrative the Far Cry series had gotten under Ubisoft's direction and they just copied their formula to a large extent. So you obviously have your prerequisite open world map with a bunch of question marks you can explore, and my face immediately went to sleep when I saw them. I've always maintained that this kind of pointless busywork is simply a way to pad out game length by wasting the player's time for no reason, while ironically keeping them away from the gameplay that's supposed to be the most engaging part. I may have criticized Sniper Ghost Warrior 2 for taking less than 6 hours to complete, but what I wanted wasn't time-wasting filler in between missions that still take less than 10 hours combined to beat without said filler. Funnily enough, I still intended to go after at least the spots on the map that were close to my critical path. After starting up the game, heading out of the starting location and exploring the very first spot, I managed to get stuck in a hole in the ground out of which I simply couldn't manage to climb out of. So within the first 5 minutes of gameplay, Sniper Ghost Warrior 3 made me not care about any aspect of its open world and actively discouraged me from even bothering to do so. Not to mention that in practical terms, all the open world does is add a commute between every mission, since you have to go back to HQ every time you want to initiate a proper story mission and then travel to your destination. It's kinda hilarious how the game wants to mask its linear story progression by also introducing side quests at HQ, but there's a grand total of 3 missions you can do, so why even bother having them as optional quests in the first place? And it's not like there's thrilling gameplay going on while you're driving towards the location the mission takes place in. If you haven't unlocked any of the fast travel points, you're literally just spending 5 minutes of your time driving from point A to point B. There's no organic emergent gameplay to be found in this title at all. Once you reach the site of your mission, Far Cry's influence once more rears its ugly head. First you have to tag all the enemies for them to show up on your radar, although this is made somewhat entertaining through the use of a little pilotable drone. After that, you have 3 ways of engaging with your enemies. You can storm the place guns blazing and simply gun down all the enemies and turn the game into an even blander version of Call of Duty. You can sneak around, take over CCTV cameras and then try to avoid enemies altogether, or you can take a suggestion from the freaking title of the game, seek out a vantage point and snipe all the enemies, because this is a game called Sniper Ghost Warrior, so take a wild guess what we're here to do. And I get it, I too am a big fan of immersive sims like Deus Ex, Thief and Dishonored that let you take on their challenges in multiple ways. However, one thing these games have in common is that they usually have varied enough gameplay and level design so that having multiple methods of solving any given problem increases variety. Sniper Ghost Warrior 3 may have 3 types of gameplay, but 2 of those are just pointing and clicking enemies to death, and the third one is a rudimentary stealth system that's nowhere near refined and fleshed out enough to be on par with what other immersive sims or dedicated stealth games offer. Sometimes it's okay to simply make a game about a single type of engagement and not try to broaden it in order to appeal to a larger crowd. The big fat mission statement under a title like Sniper Ghost Warrior should be to deliver the best sniping experience possible, not to water it down with assault rifles, hacking, sneaking, open world exploration and the like. These are all things that actively take away from the fun of sitting atop a hill and picking off distant targets, ideally without alerting all the other targets. But the game just keeps pushing you into close quarters, so you'll have to engage enemies directly in front of you. This comes to a head during the mission where you have to navigate a maze in some rock fissures, so you're literally just crawling through a mostly linear tunnel with a few dead ends while picking off a handful of enemies. The game even tags one enemy as worthy of interrogation in order to find the way out of the maze on the other end. I simply couldn't believe it when the game had the gall of telling me through one of my support characters that after killing that interrogation target without interrogating him, I now had to find my way on my own after I had already scouted the entire level with my little drone and figured out a path out of this predictable maze way ahead of time. Speaking of predictable, let's switch gears and talk about the plot. Because God knows, if we want some sniping gameplay, we really need to have enough narrative justification for murdering people from a distance they can't possibly prepare for or defend against. You play as John North and are sent to Georgia for some reason or other. The real reason you're there is that you think your younger brother might be there as well and John wants to save him. See, a few years ago in the prologue mission, you and your brother went on a sniping assignment that went tits up. The bad guys kidnapped your brother and left you alive for some reason. Apparently one of the bad guys is an escapee from a Metal Gear game, because he always plays Russian roulette with his victims, and if they get lucky, they get to live. The story jumps ahead 2 years and you're in Georgia in order to combat some separatists in that region after they got unusually high funding and resources from somewhere or someone. During one of your missions, things go south for North after another highly skilled sniper interrupts proceedings. No points for guessing that the rival sniper turns out to be your long-lost brother, spoiler alert. And it just so happens that all the missions going forward somehow lead back to your brother and his organization being somehow in cahoots with the separatists, even though the guy in your earpiece constantly maintains that your brother has no priority and the player is supposedly just there to curb the separatists. Never mind that the group your brother belongs to apparently consists of genetically engineered super soldiers, while all the guys you get to fight are random Eastern European blokes with sackcloths on their head. On your journey, you're also aided by a few other characters. One is fellow Georgian sniper and former lover, Lydia, whose relationship with John can best be characterized as the most passive-aggressive infatuation I have ever seen. Tons of dialogue is spent elaborating on how John somehow did a bad thing and how Lydia despises him for it, and yet somehow I get a strong feeling that the writer desperately wants people to think that these two still want to fuck each other. Naturally, this entire plotline never resolves to anything, because why would it? The second person that gets regular screen time is a Mossad agent named Raquel. She too doesn't have too much personality. She's basically another blank slate that developers cast their strong, independent woman fetish onto. Though ironically, even though she gets significantly less screen time and is overall less important to the narrative, her character animations seem way more natural and human than Lydia's, who basically looks like a badly animated ragdoll. But the actual reason why these two characters are here is because otherwise the game would have been a sausage fest and the developers needed the promise of camo-wrapped boobies to keep their players from having indecent thoughts about John's considerable homoerotic relationship towards his younger brother while he shoots deadly white-hot lead out of his humongous phallic sniper rifle. With all that out of the way, it's kind of interesting that the technical problems the game suffers from are the least of its worries. For one, the loading times are just unforgivably bad. The song that plays during the loading screens has been burned into my memory. I can sing along with it every time it starts, and I don't even understand the language it's sung in. The pre-rendered cinematics look noticeably worse than the actual graphics during gameplay, and even those aren't much to write home about. There are some weird texture warping artifacts going on along with plenty of pop-in, which is just unacceptable in a game that's supposed to make use of long-distance gameplay. And then there's that one funny occurrence where I managed to slip and fall off a tower, plunge 30 meters down onto an enemy, and because the game treats falling onto an enemy as a way of disposing of them, I emerge entirely unharmed and with the enemy dead under my boots. I'm also not quite sure how the game calculates the post-mission grades because these numbers just seem random to me and don't actually reflect what I did during the mission. Not that it matters, because the rating doesn't seem to have an actual impact on the rewards you're getting, which are comprised of money to buy weapons and ammo, supplies to craft ammo, and skill points to spend on an utterly token RPG system whose benefits are entirely perfunctory and never seem all that helpful. It all just feels so token because buying new weapons doesn't change the gameplay, it's just another thing the developers had to include because other realistic military shooters all have those fancy realistic weapons and offer different loadouts, crafting systems, etc. Meanwhile, I stuck to my default sniper rifle because I simply couldn't be bothered to do anything that went beyond crafting enough bullets for any given mission and that one tool that let me repair silencers on the fly. In the end, Sniper Ghost Warrior 3 is an open-world tactical shooter that wants to offer immersive sim-style gameplay, RPG elements, and crafting system and fails to realize that all this nonsense is just a pointless addition in order to appear more like a Far Cry game, rather than having its own unique identity as a game that focuses entirely on the mission statement present in the title. It could be forgiven that the game wants to cast such a wide net. Heck, I usually too would feel favorable towards the ambition. But the execution leaves so much to be desired and takes so much away from what a sniping game should offer that even the best of ambitions don't manage to salvage the project.